After an interminable wait, finally we get the Chancellor's budget this week. We'll also be talking today about Shabana Mahmood's new immigration proposals, a Ukraine peace deal, possibly, and the results of the COVID inquiry. I'm Frank McKenna, and this is the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Yay, it worked.
So welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics Podcast. I've been absent over the past couple of weeks, and my two colleagues who joined me this morning, Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock, have run amok with a load of rubbish in terms of headlights and theatres and all sorts of nonsense. So we're going to get back to the nuts and bolts, the bread and butter, the real politic of what is happening in the corridors of power in Westminster. We'll also be looking at some of the things that are happening internationally, in particular the potential Ukraine peace deal. But we're going to start, of course, with the budget, which has been going on and on and on and on for many, many weeks. And we did say when the November the 26th date was announced as the timing for the budget, that Rachel Reeves was leaving herself far too many hostages to fortune. And of course, what's happened is two things, really. Firstly, whilst people wait to see what she's going to announce in the budget this week, they delay decision making. So investments don't happen, businesses don't take on more staff, businesses don't necessarily spend on capital because they're concerned about what might be coming down the tracks in terms of the budget. And she's basically tried to run a budget off opinion poll. And my guess is the reason she's backtracked on what was a heavily trailed, likely income tax increase of 2p has been ditched because More in Common, big polling agency these days, of course, and Luke Trill, found that 63% of the British public would prefer cuts to public services than they would to tax increases. I would not be a bit surprised if Labour's internal polling was telling them something likewise, and therefore she's backtracked on that. So we are back to this hodgepodge of tax increases, trying to please the OBR, and I was delighted to hear you guys getting stuck into the nonsense that we have in terms of this process last week, and Kevin Johnson in particular saying we need to look again at what we do with the OBR and its forecasts. But she's got herself in a right mess, hasn't she? And Jim, to be fair, you said this was just a nonsense, this budget date of the 26th of November, and so it has proved.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go on about it, but I mean, early in September, I said we'd be putting up the Christmas decorations. It was far too long, but I didn't actually believe that it would have this effect on, the housing market, business investment. There's real evidence that this has all come to a standstill. But of course, I wasn't just, I was right in a sense by luck in my prediction, because I didn't expect it to be accompanied by this endless commentary and, sort of putting a finger up in the air, seeing what would work sort of approach of the government with a whole range of different things, which is further destabilised it. And so it's a combination of the length of time between the announcement of the budget date and what's actually happened with all these speculations that's actually caused this serious damage in advance. And it's important because a Chancellor who already had very little slack with the voters and with the business community, has really dissipated that. And if this is going to have to be some budget, she's going to have to make the speech of her life to get other than what I think will happen, which is, as you've already said, a whole lot of people are going to be fed up with what I call the bits and pieces approach. So she will annoy a whole new section of people, like she annoyed the farmers last time and people depending on winter fuel allowances. And so the budget will not contribute to any sort of government recovery. I may be proved wrong, but that's That's what I fear. I mean, we're obviously, she's. What would be interesting is to see, is she going to try and balance a couple of things? One is appeasing this lively parliamentary Labour Party, which seems to be calling the shots, with the lifting of this two-child benefit. You won't be surprised to know that I'm going to mention Mel Stride now, who actually explicitly and fairly courageously, I thought, came out saying it's just not fair to, if people want to have 3 or more children, then they should plan for that. And if they can't afford it, well, that's their decision. And I think
bugger the kids.
Well, we can have it.
Who don't make the decision to be born, of course.
No, of course not. But let's perhaps look at that slightly separately. Rail fares are being frozen. There's probably going to be a revaluation of what's called mansions, which are the upper bounds of council tax. So that's quite problematic. But on the other side, are we going to see a courageous Chancellor bearing down on the welfare bill? Obviously, it won't apply in relation to two-child benefit, but there are other reforms that could be made. So in order to balance the books, and even though Zach Polanski, with an eloquent contribution yesterday about saying let's not let the markets dominate our thinking, will the markets tolerate it? So I'm broadly pretty pessimistic that Rachel Reeves will emerge from this to save the Labour government from going further down at the moment.
Yeah, it's not been a happy time for Rachel Reeves, the Prime Minister, number 10. It's been chaotic within the organisation again. I know that you discussed fair length the nonsense around Wes Streeting last week, maybe the week before, and none of this gives you a sense that we have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who have a grip. And then, of course, you've got this, as you said, lively parliamentary Labour Party, I would say juvenile parliamentary Labour Party, who just simply fail to see the big challenges that this government faces. Now, I don't think that's been helped by the narrative that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister adopted early on in the government. They go back to winter fuel allowance, the farmers, those sort of things. The speech that she made couple of weeks ago, that breakfast briefing that she gave, that should have been the speech she made a year ago. Yeah, that was the time when she should have ripped the plaster off and said, it's a total mess. We didn't realise what we were facing. Trump is now emerged as the favourite to take on the presidency. We've got big problems in terms of defence spending. She had so many excuses at that time to say, we are going to have to break our manifesto pledge, and she probably would have just about got away with it then. But to wait 15, 16 months and then play this game of hokey pokey, Joe, it's just absolutely nonsensical. How many times have we got to say, poor comms? But increasingly, you've got to say, no political instinct.
Well, absolutely. And, you wrote it in your blog last week, Frank, and we've discussed it here before, the juvenile attitude of new MPs who, faced with the reality of what politics means, which is making tough decisions and getting on with the job that they promised to do. I think this has been an absolute disaster for the Labour Party. And I think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, between them, haven't got a political bone in their respective bodies. And whilst Keir Starmer does wonderful things abroad and probably would have been a bloody fabulous foreign secretary, he should be here. Why on earth is he swanning off to Brazil and going to things like the beginning of the COP thing, not even the actual COP event itself, just the sort of pre-loading bit. And I think, you're absolutely right. We do not need a budget. Business does not need a budget. This is a bit of tinkering here. More complicated rules that will apparently, maybe crack down on some benefits, but it will create layers of bureaucracy. As we've said before, rip the plaster off, put income tax up by a penny, cut the triple lock, and if you want to, use that to pay for lifting the two-child benefit cap, which I've got mixed feelings about. And, just be clear so that business can start planning. And, to a certain extent, not bugger the markets, because that's what Liz Truss did, and that didn't go terribly well, but actually look ahead as we discussed last week, the whole thing about the OBR is always predicated on the next 5 years, not the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. So you're never building in, if you spend this money now on investing in X, Y, or Z, in 7 years' time, you will reap the benefits. So we're always going around the edges and thinking, well, we can afford, to have the house painted, but only if we cut back on the gardener coming twice a month. It's pathetic. I did just for fun, I think it was in the Times at the weekend, there was a thing about, play being Chancellor. Well, I just went through this thing. I ended up with £153 billion surplus and nobody particularly suffered. So it's not that hard.
Well, if you want the job, Joe, I'm sure there'll be one. There'll be one.
Well, I mean,
coming along soon.
I think if she does a really bad budget on Wednesday, or one that just makes people just go, oh, for Christ's sake, here we go round and round again, I don't see how she can stay in position. And I think, we may come on to this in a little while about, how long has Keir Starmer got when he is presiding over such a bloody shambles that is having a huge impact on people's lives.
I think there's a couple of things I'd say in her defence, if I may. As I say, I think they've got the politics terribly wrong. We've not hindsight. We said that this length of time in terms of a lead into the budget was a huge mistake, and so it has proved to be. Why people around her don't see this, never mind she herself as Chancellor. But there's a couple of things that she has done that I think deserve credit. One, of course, is capital spend, which she is going to protect. Now, the problem with that is, of course, it is long-term thinking, and she won't get the credit, and the government isn't getting the credit for that. And that's part of the problem of not having a narrative, not having those longer-term ambitions and a long-term vision that people can actually buy into. So that's a tick in the box for her, in a sense. I think that, like you, Jim, I've always been concerned about the politics of the two-child benefit cap, because people out there will say instinctively, well, it's wrong. If people want to have more kids, then they should have to pay for them. But of course, all sorts of things happen, don't they? People get ill, people get widowed, people lose their jobs, people get made redundant. AI comes along. Jobs that we thought were secure are not going to be secure. They've got 4 kids. They had a salary of £100,000 coming into the house. All of a sudden, it's cut to 50. What do? We allow those kids to languish in poverty. And what we've seen in this country since the two-child benefit cap was introduced is a huge increase in child poverty, which is unacceptable in 2025, I would suggest. And again, if you were to look at the statistics in terms of what child poverty costs this country in the longer term, then you will see that it is immense. It is enormous, both in terms of the social fabric of the country, but also in terms of the money it then costs, whether that be in health, whether that be in social services, whether that be because of lack of educational attainment. So I think there is a case to be made for the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. It's not being made particularly well. But alongside that, and again, this sort of reminds me of Wes Streeting's initial mistake when he gave the doctors that pay rise without saying, but here are the conditions. She's lifting the two-child benefit cap in the budget without saying to her backbench rebels. But what that does mean is all these buggers claiming PIP and working from home and getting signed off by GPs without even having an appointment with mental health issues, we're going to get them back into work. Not because it's mean, not because it's evil, but because that is not just good for the economy, it is good for the people involved. The worst thing I can imagine saying to somebody who's got anxiety and mental health challenges is, stay at home and we'll just pay you to sit there. It's fucking ridiculous. And that's what she should have been going to Parliament with on Wednesday. If we make these cuts in benefits that do need to be cut and do need to be controlled, then I will be able to lift the two-child benefit cap. But she's cart before the horse, in my opinion, Jim.
Well, can I just ask you, you speak with great certainty that she won't do any of those things. I mean, you really don't think that the PIP
I think
stuff
she'll suggest it, but is that going to be part of the budget, which MPs need to vote on? Or is this going to be, well, we've got the review coming in a couple of weeks' time. Let's see what the recommendations are. And if it's the latter, then my fear is that those same MPs that didn't have the appetite to vote for a drop in the ocean of cuts, £5 billion last year, nothing in comparison to what we're looking at in terms of welfare spend. Are they really going to? They're going to say, well, we've got the prize we wanted, we've got the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. Why do I want to go back to my constituency and get a load of emails off people who are getting PIP?
Yeah, you pointed up this is the basic problem, because the Timms review, this is what you're referring to, which is looking at all this. Now, and your certainty that it's not going to be in the budget is probably confirmed by the fact that the Timms review is not reported. But a working together government would have had the Timms review, because don't tell me a review can take as long as the government wants it to. And if it's prolonged, it's because they don't want to take decisions. If it's shorter, they do want to take decisions. So they could have lined up the Timms review during this long autumn of waiting for the budget, and then said exactly what you're saying. In return for this two-child benefit, you've got to bite the bullet on these various things like PIP and stress interviews and things like that. I mean, the other issue is the triple lock. Increasingly people are saying that's not justifiable. Is there going to be any sort of courage on that front? I mean, this is what we wanted to see in the run up to the budget. We haven't seen it. It may all, sometimes chancellors bring spring surprises, and the balance of it will leave us all magnificently surprised on Wednesday afternoon, but I doubt it.
Well, she's got a low bar. That's the thing that she can give herself some credit for. Nobody's expecting any miracles on Wednesday, so if she delivers something that is half competent and delivers it competently, and the markets react well, and you start to see businesses say, well, we thought it was going to be worse than that, so we can look ahead with a little bit more confidence now, she may buy herself some credit. But my fear is that not just Rachel Reeves and the Labour government, the opposition parties as well, are kicking the tough decisions down the road. They're basically saying to the British public, you can have your cake and you can eat it. We don't need to cut public services. We don't need to put taxes up. We can keep the triple lock in place. You can keep all your benefits. You can sign off sick if you want. Stride said a few weeks ago, we're going to cut £47 billion off the welfare bill. He didn't say where he was going to get that. And he didn't go near the triple lock, which is the one obvious thing that does need to be sorted out. So, it's great that people are happy to have a kick at kids who are in poverty and not support the lifting of the two-child benefit cap. But rich pensioners who have 99 holidays like you, James, are protected with the triple lock. It's absolute nonsense. Yeah. And unless and until, a serious point, unless and until our politicians will have an honest conversation with the British public, then I'm afraid we are destined to have a Chancellor of whichever colour going through this, as I say, hokey pokey of, we'll take a little bit here, a little bit there. And in the end, people say, well, the whole system's broken. We'll give it to Farage. He'd last 2 or 3 months. The markets would blow up. And you'd probably be in this situation, which we've had in Europe for many, many years now, of governments and prime ministers changing every 5 minutes.
Just very briefly, Stride has given the global figure. I'm sure he will be under pressure and indeed may wish to come forward with more detailed proposals nearer the time. And Farage, to be fair, the other week did rein back. He started to sound like a conventional politician, saying, we made some extravagant promises at the last election. We can't be as ambitious now. So I take your general point, but I just put those 2 slight reservations.
But the thing is, Jim, he didn't go near triple lock.
No.
And that is the most obvious thing.
It's absolutely.
None of them are talking about social care.
I doubt the Tories will ever.
No government, no opposition want to take on that massive issue that we've got of social care other than Ed Davey.
I doubt the Tories will ever do it because virtually all their members are in receipt of the triple lock.
Yeah,
Sorry, that was a cheap joke.
But Jim, they're also the people who are dealing with the impact of social care and the muddle of social care. And the Liberal Democrats have consistently been the only party that have mentioned it. And you know, you mentioned reviews, Frank, and how they sort of get. My fear is that they'll go, yeah, we are going to look at cutting, you know, the triple lock. We're going to get Louise Casey probably to review it, and then we are going to look at reforming PIP. So we'll get somebody else to review that. They got, when he was Agriculture Environment Secretary, Steve Reed got Minette Batters, the former NFU president, who's now a crossbench peer, and commissioned her to write a report on the future of farming and food security. That report has been published and was supposed to come out before the budget. It now won't come out. It might come out before Christmas. Now, farmers are absolutely furious. We are on the brink, in my opinion, of a serious escalation of conflict across Europe in the next few years. You know, I'm sitting here looking out at a golf course. I am ready to run the Women's Land Army and turn it into a vegetable patch.
I thought you were going to be Chancellor.
No, I can't be Chancellor.
She'll do both.
I'm going to run the Land Army.
The Lords.
Lady
Phillips of Kent under
but the point is, you know, unless you look at those really serious issues, if we are going to end up in conflict, if Europe is going to have to beef up not just its defence but its fighting capability, then an awful lot of those NEETs, the kids who are sitting at home, not in work, education or training, might find themselves on a front line somewhere or conscripted as we fight Russia. And I mean, I know that sounds ludicrous for a Monday morning, but it's not that far off. And I just think we haven't got a serious government looking at the really serious issues about how you make the country, its people and its future safe and secure. And that does mean things like, and you're absolutely right, Frank, about child poverty. You know, if children grow up in poor housing with poor health and poor opportunities, that costs us all, but most of all them, in the long run. And the really simple thing to do is to say, we are cutting the triple lock, but that money will go entirely to child welfare.
I think the other issue, though, again, if you look at all the polling, people don't want to pay for defence.
No.
It's an incredible thing when you think back to, because people keep saying, you know, Margaret Thatcher would have sorted all this out. Well, I'm afraid Margaret Thatcher wouldn't have sorted all this out, because Margaret Thatcher wasn't trying to grapple with the fact that we've made this stupid and catastrophic decision to leave the European Union. And Margaret Thatcher was able to wave the nuclear bomb around and hang it over the Labour Party like a bad smell. You know, these people are going to leave you defenceless. But when you say to people out there now, well, we're going to have to spend more on defence, they look at you as though you're daft. And so these are the issues that we've got to face. I mean, but you mentioned Polanski, Jim. You know, he's talking about leaving the United Nations. He's an absolute prat. Yeah. So, you know, these are the issues that people, it's easy. Some of these slogans, the populists from the left and the right come up with, make it more difficult for mainstream politicians to actually have that honest conversation, don't they?
Yes, and it's fueled, of course, by this. The difference from the Thatcher era is that it's fueled by social media, which has a propensity to emphasize, for commercial reasons, more clicks, more money for the, you know, these mega billionaires in California, to analyze everything in sound bites and simplistic answers. And so it suits the far left and the far right to have that orchestration. And you know, politicians may say they try and ignore the noise, but you can't ignore the noise completely. So that's the difference from the Thatcher era. It's you know, obviously a situation where they will sort of make the running in the short term. But you did forecast what might happen if either Polanski or Farage came to power, and what could very rapidly turn into into a collapse. And I think, you know, it's still a long way out from the election. At the moment, if you were asking me, I think we'll have a pretty confused election result with 3 or 4 parties roughly getting the same number of seats potentially. I can go into that if you want to now as another podcast, but you do point out that the danger is that they won't be tested in the normal way before the election. People will, you know, if they continue to be completely frustrated by the Conservatives and Labour Party, will elect in some form the Greens or Reform to power, and then we really could face a very rapid and catastrophic crisis.
Won't be the Greens. If we go to our next subject, which is immigration, which again is something that has been exercising us in many conversations over the past 12 months or so. And Jim, you've had your wish, because Shabana Mahmood has been very firm in terms of coming out with some statements this week, which I think even upset some of those very loyal Labour backbenchers, and they were on the feet. Stella Creasy being one, saying these things are cruel and unworkable. I think what she's done is she's laid down a marker. She's sending some signals in terms of trying to say we've got to start to look tougher to stop people seeing the UK as a soft touch in terms of where they may come. A couple of problems that I think she's going to face moving forward. Not least, the thing that our members keep telling us when we're at our different events, and Jim, you will have experienced this. If we're going to build 1.5 million houses, we need more immigrants, not less. The ratio now of our workforce to people of the elderly generation is 2 to 1. 2 to 1. And the other problem that we've already seen now with our universities is their inability to recruit foreign students is having a huge impact on their finances. So this thing of immigration and all the negativity that goes with it, there are consequences, and many of them are economic, Joe.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's the whole economic issue, and there's the whole thing about legal immigration against illegal immigration. And unfortunately, it all gets muddled up into one image of a load of young men arriving on a dinghy across the English Channel, and forgetting the people that have been brought in since we left the EU, as we have said a million times, which meant that we had to bring in people from further afield who are obviously going to want to bring their families with them, because it's not like popping back to Poland or Romania. You know, you could actually leave the kids and your partner, you could come and work for a week or something and do whatever it was. You're not going to do that if you're coming from Africa or the Philippines. So there's all of that has never been properly addressed. I think I am a great fan of Shabana Mahmood. And I think, you know, the fact that she swore so shockingly in the House of Commons was an absolute cut through, you know, and she took down the rather smug sort of hand-wringing Liberal Democrat, oh, this is very cruel, this is horrible. And I think the point that she has tried to make, I'm not sure whether it's cut through, but I think is the sense that if we don't tackle it properly, everybody who has got brown skin or black skin is caught in that same thing of you're an immigrant, you know, F off, go home, whether you're here legally, whether you've been born here, you know, all of those things. And I think she's right. But I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning, Frank, that you've got this lily-livered, very naive, very immature, inexperienced parliamentary Labour Party who cannot see the impact of the hatred and the speed at which it is being whipped up by populists and bots, you know, whether that's Farage or Yaxley Lennon, or whether it's Matt Goodwin, who is rapidly becoming a white supremacist, and in my view should be taken off every outlet, you know, national broadcasting outlet. But you've got that going on, you've got the flags, you've got the hatred. Now, you know, that makes us a very, very hostile environment, not just for immigrants, legal or otherwise. It makes us a hostile environment for anyone who is not white. And that's really awful. And I think that's the point she's trying to make. However, I do think this sort of, you know, indefinite leave to settle, expanding that up to 20 years is going to put people in limbo. And whilst, the government has said, well, we've looked at the experiment in Denmark and it's worked, you can't compare Britain with Denmark. And also the centre-left party have just lost quite comprehensively in an election to be replaced by a much more left-wing socialist party. So I think, she's set the right tone. She's made it really clear that, she wants to get it done and she needs to get it done. But whether or not it can happen, because that's what people want. They want to see a difference. They're not going to see a difference until we stop having the pictures of people arriving on boats. And, we are then caught in this thing of, we need to not put them in hotels. Oh, but I don't want them in that old army camp in my backyard, as one of the deputy leaders of the Green Party said.
Yeah. Well, again, it's people in this country wanting the cake and eating it. So we don't want immigrants in hotels. Okay, absolutely get that. So we're going to put them in army barracks. Well, no, not if the army barracks is in my constituency.
Exactly.
Jim, what did you make of Shabana Mahmood's statement?
Yeah, it is an effort to try and claw back the initiative on this. It's very difficult for the Labour Party, which has always been an international party, always had sympathy for genuine refugees. And it is going to be a very interesting tussle once again with what I've dubbed the lively parliamentary Labour Party. Of course, Shabana Mahmood's message to them is, if you don't back me, what you'll be getting is a whole lot worse from your point of view. And I think that's a powerful message that she's going to put over in what will be a bit of a struggle with the parliamentary Labour Party and, of course, with the House of Lords as well. There's a number of things about this, which, if you're looking at the proposals, Joe's referred to the 20 years, redefining what a close relative is, expulsion if you commit crimes, if you've come in illegally. All that requires the administration of the Home Office, and the Home Office hasn't covered itself in glory in actually administering this. So even when and if this gets on the statute book, there is, it's going to take time, and you've referred to this, Frank. People are impatient, but it's going to take time to see if these detailed reforms in this very difficult area actually produce something that people can see. Because what is unacceptable to people is the current situation. Obviously, there's other illegal immigration, but the optics of the boats coming across, people being put in hotels or now being taken out of hotels and dispersed into houses around the country, which I think in itself is going to have problems, and they're on benefits and things like that. That is what's winding people up. What I think you're right in saying is we do need controlled immigration. And to be fair to the Home Secretary, she has said she's going to strengthen the safe routes to come into this country for people to do useful jobs. Perhaps we will have to cap the number of people even coming in for that. But that's what people want to see. And then we finally come to the problem of the ECHR, because one or two of these things bear down on the ECHR. And, then the debate becomes whether we can get the court in Strasbourg. I actually attended a conference at the UCL in London a couple of weeks ago, which I want to write about in a blog sometime. This is judges and people who actually work in the ECHR talking about the thing from their perspective. It's a bit too much detail for today, but are we going to be able to get them to slightly modify their views? Because it's generally agreed, and Lord Sumption's talked about this, that the court has really expanded its area of activity over the years, and how they will react to this, and whether we can get their cooperation rather than Farage's alternative to create massive international damage to our country's reputation by leaving.
I think what Shabana Mahmood was saying was that we would suspend a couple of the articles of ECHR, which is 3 and 8, if memory serves me correctly, which would enable us to deport a good number of people who've been able to use ECHR as a way of staying in the UK. My feeling now on this whole debate is, again, it's not been a serious conversation. It's all about boats, it's all about hotels. You've just said, Jim, they're all on benefits. They're not. They're on about £25 per day, a family that is. If you're here as an asylum seeker and you're in a hotel, you're not on benefits. You're not allowed to work, which seems to me to be nonsensical, because again, the right want it both ways, don't they? They say, we don't want these buggers taking benefits from us and living off the state, but we don't want them to work. And there's 800,000 vacancies that are out there. So I think that the whole immigration debate has become so toxic that, again, we're not able to have a sensible conversation about it. And I just say to people, be careful what you wish for, because if Shabana Mahmood's proposals do go ahead, then we will take an economic hit. And that triple lock will have to go double quick, because we're getting down to the ratio of 1 to 1 in terms of people who are of working age supporting our pensioners. It just doesn't add up. This whole debate around immigration is so much about anti-brown and black skin these days, and it's not about what works, what's fair. Should we still be supporting people fleeing from wars? Should we be supporting women fleeing from, let's face it, Afghanistan? Women who supported the UK during that war, are we to send all those people back now because it doesn't suit our purposes anymore? So many of these issues that are complex and complicated, and yet the whole debate has been hijacked by the populists. And I'm afraid, as I say, people are going to have to watch for what they wish for, because some of the things that could come to pass if we are as tough on immigration as even Shabana Mahmood is now saying, and it could be very, very damaging for the country. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the COVID inquiry, and we're going to talk about Ukraine. One final thing that I meant to say during our discussion on the budget, and perhaps something that would get the Chancellor or her successor out of the mess that she's broiled herself in over the past few months, is why don't we introduce PERDA for the budget?
Or
whereby
reintroduce.
People are not able to discuss and speculate and send the markets into turmoil and send businesses into the place where they're wondering what the hell's going to happen because there's different things being suggested on a daily basis. How have we come to the position where local councils, I think it's a month, it may be 5 weeks before a local council election that hardly any bugger cares about 20% of the average population vote in them, they're not allowed to make any statements because of this thing called PERDA, and yet economically sensitive, market-sensitive information is being influenced by our Treasury officials with leaks, with briefings to the press. It's absolutely ridiculous. So if they want to restore faith into our budget system, then one of the things that I'd love to see Rachel Reeves announce on Wednesday is, and this is the last time you will see a budget presented in the way that we've had to present it in recent weeks, because we are reintroducing PERDA, something, Jim, that back in your day, Absolutely. It was the case, wasn't it?
I remember in 1947, the Chancellor spoke to an Evening Standard journalist in Central Lobby near where I was standing and said, I'm going to increase the tax on cigarettes. The guy dashed to his office, and in those days, I remember it well, there was a stop press on the front page of every newspaper, and he flashed this tobacco news before the Chancellor had even announced it in the House of Commons, and he had to resign over it.
Yeah. And it was ridiculous, because you and I both remember, Jim, in the old days, the editors of city desks and business editors, they could go to the Treasury and they could only see the document as the Chancellor was reading it. And I don't know where this sudden relaxation came from, but it's ridiculous because it unsettles the markets. And it goes back to, let's put it out there and see what the public think. Well, let's ask the public a different question. Instead of saying, do you want tax cuts or cuts to public spend, tax increase or cuts to public spending? Well, no, thank you. We'll keep the tax as it is. We'll have cuts to public spending. Then ask them what they would cut, yeah. And you might get a different answer.
I think this game that you played, I must find it and playing the Chancellor.
I'll find it for you. It's fabulous.
Well, actually, go to Frank's point about people need to be more realistic, and he
Yeah.
was talking about that in relation to defence spending. Perhaps everyone should actually play the game, and the important point Frank's making is make the decisions yourself. And you want this, you don't want to spend money on defence, you want welfare benefits, you want this one. But actually, if more people actually just played the game, you'd see the difficulties that the politicians who we've elected have. I think it's a good point.
Yeah. Right, well, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the man who we all miss greatly, Boris Johnson, and the COVID inquiry's result in terms of how they think he handled the pandemic. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics podcast, and one of the things that took even longer than the budget has taken to deliver has been the results of the COVID inquiry. Of course, it's been at the cost of multi-millions pounds. I'm not sure by the end of it we were told anything we probably didn't know already, but the key findings, certainly the thing that the media focused and honed in upon, was the fact that had we locked down perhaps 2-3 weeks earlier, then up to 23,000 lives may have been saved, and we would have not necessarily have faced those intermittent lockdowns that we suffered, and of course had such a catastrophic effect on the economy, on people's mental health, and indeed on children's education. The main recipient of criticism was the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, although fair to say the nationalists leaders in Scotland and Wales didn't fare too well either. Overall, it was a pretty damning affair as far as our politicians were concerned. But as I say, Joe, nothing particularly new, nothing that you would say, oh, I'm so pleased we spent all that money on that inquiry, because I'd never have guessed that Boris Johnson was a buffoon if the inquiry wouldn't have told me.
It's astonishing. I think, as you say, it didn't really tell it, or hasn't really told us anything that we didn't know already, except the level at which Boris Johnson was so unbelievably negligent, taking days off at Chequers, not attending Cobra meetings, just being absent and leaving it all in the hands of his hapless health secretary, Matt Hancock. But I think it's a bigger question, and we so often hear calls for a public inquiry as the answer to everything, whether it's grooming gangs, whether it's Hillsborough, whether it's Grenfell, whether it's blood scandal, post office. I think there are something like 20 at the moment ongoing public inquiries, and they cost a fortune. I mean, this COVID inquiry is £200 million. That's an awful lot of money that could be spent on other things, like possibly improving facilities in hospitals, or something like that, or care homes, for instance. And it will come out telling us, pretty much what we know and knew at the time. So I do think we should be thinking, hang on a minute, what is the point of this? I mean, other countries, France did theirs within a year. I think the Scandinavian countries are similar, did a quick fasting, because what you need out of these, if you're going to have an inquiry, is say, what do we do next time to not repeat the mistakes? Well, okay, the first thing you do is you don't let Boris Johnson anywhere near power ever again. You wish Matt Hancock had stayed in the celebrity jungle, and actually you make sure that you have got sensible measures in place. But if an inquiry only needs to then another review, back to what we were talking about before the break, you just end up with kicking the can down the road. The only good thing about it, the COVID inquiry, that I think has shown, is that we did do really, really well on the vaccine rollout and getting that through. But that wasn't to do with the government, that was to do with the woman who ran it, who is bloody fantastic. And that's what you need. You need those sort of people. You didn't need Dido Harding, track and trace, disappeared without one. But you did need somebody who really knew what she was doing, bringing pharmaceutical companies together and getting it working. But, for all the people who worked through COVID, whether they were nurses, doctors, bin men, paramedics, shop workers, whatever, people in care homes. This will just be an insult, you know. £200 million on what? On lawyers to tell us that Boris Johnson was an absolute waste of space.
I think that had the inquiry been sort of quick and got these results out a lot sooner than they have, and they should have done that. You know, this nonsense of having to interview bloody, you know, Tom, Dick, Harry, and your auntie, it was ridiculous, and they got caught up in this nonsensical drama of trawling through people's emails and which minister was slagging which other minister off, and how nonsensical some of the things that Matt Hancock was saying and contradicting. I mean, that doesn't help anyone. It's tittle tattle, you know, and as I say, to spend 200 million quid on that. But the thing that I think they ought to have perhaps highlighted more, maybe this isn't the inquiry's fault, maybe this is just the media world that we're in these days, but it was this idea that we fell very quickly into, or the government fell very quickly into groupthink. And not just the government, medical officials, the opposition. I remember, well, at one point they were talking about, I think it was the 99th lockdown in Liverpool. The public health officials were saying that we needed to lock down again. And I pushed back against it. And fortunately won the argument at that particular time. But the number of people who were on social media basically accusing me of being a murderer and not caring about old people was absolutely incredible. And we did get ourselves sucked into this whole discussion and debate about one issue, which was, could COVID kill somebody? Rather than, if we lock down, what impact is that going to have on the economy, on people's mental health, on education? And that groupthink, as I say, was one of the things that the inquiry did criticise, rightly so, Jim. But I'd like more of that sort of thing to be at the front of our mind, rather than this, oh, Boris Johnson was a prat, which we all knew anyway.
Yes, there was a bit more in the report than that. But I mean, Boris Johnson was temperamentally exactly the wrong sort of person to have as prime minister when this was actually happened. He was a guy with a very short attention span, when what this required was an absolutely forensic analysis of what was going on. You've alluded to the fact that he didn't seem to grasp the enormity of it early on. I mean, you know, to be fair, he nearly died himself during the course of it. And his in the hokey coking about lockdowns and the debate that you had, you know, you were referring to in Liverpool, you know, was going on nationally, and instinctively he didn't want a lockdown again, but you know, eventually he had to, and that hesitation caused a lot of problems. My main criticisms of the inquiry are that it took too long, and I know it wasn't within its remit, but you know, was a lot of press coverage about, you know, what was the source of this, and it is pretty important, and we still haven't got an answer, you know. And there's I think I mean, you know, both of you may contradict me, but I think there is some consensus around the fact that it was a human intervention in trying to enhance the role of a virus at that Wuhan hospital, and that the security there wasn't what it should have been. And then we get into, if that was the case, then we get into the whole issue of our relations with China, which we've discussed in other contexts more recently. But you know, I mean, I would just say, you know, there is a little bit of hindsight from some people here. I mean, it was quite extraordinary what had happened. I mean, you know, 1918, the Spanish flu was the sort of last comparable thing. So it was 100 years or more. And, you know, people were confused and bewildered about the scale of it. I mean, originally we thought, oh, the Italians are messing up, because we saw the terrible scenes there, not knowing it was already coming to this country. And I remember the first thing that happened in the northwest was a busload of people taken from Liverpool Airport to Arrow Park Hospital to be isolated. You know, a tiny little thing. We didn't realise the enormity of what was going to happen. You know, there was, as you say, a great debate about what we should do. You know, there was quite an authoritarian streak about some people. They probably won't admit it now, but you know, the full closure of schools was partly driven by people in this country rather alarmingly rushing to sort of authoritarian extremes, and almost liking the restrictions and so on, which proved so disastrous. My anxiety is that, of course, over time, as with the banking crisis, people forget. I mean, I'm not aware now. Do we? Because to be fair to the report, it does make certain recommendations about having a register of experts, having a plan in place for the next one, because a lot of scientific experts tell us, with international travel and various other things, that it might not be another 100 years before it happens. Identifying people most at risk. I mean, that dreadful business about putting people back into care homes when they were already infected, things like that. Sudden changes of policy. I mean, do you remember all the hokey cokey in Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham? Is it Trafford? Is it somewhere else? Completely unimplementable. But there's a lot of hindsight here. But I agree with both of you. These inquiries, they're set up actually partly to deflect from politicians having to take decisions, and it costs an awful lot of money.
Well, hindsight for some, James, but I have to say, feather in my cap, because I said at the time that the economic damage and the further damage to, as I say, mental health, education, look at the mess that the economy is in now. And I know that we point to Brexit, and rightly so, in terms of the damage that's done, but the pandemic was catastrophic as well, and we've never got.
But you don't think that there would have been a massive increase in the number of deaths if you're more, if I can put it like this, more liberal view on the economy and on schools had prevailed, and we let people
Well,
mix?
apparently not. If you look at other countries, the death rate was probably the same wherever you look and whatever measures they took, and some were very liberal and some were very, like here, draconian. And I think that there was a way in which you could have, well, the report says it, doesn't it? Locked down sooner, and you'd had a lot less of an impact later on in terms of having to open up, lock down, open up again. But also, after that first 6-7 weeks, we were seeing the data. I was on a couple of business groups that were looking at the data, and it was obvious to all of us that it was elderly people who were really at risk, people who had underlying health difficulties. Now, I'm not going to go as far as Boris Johnson apparently went, or allegedly went, and say, well, fuck him, it's only an extra couple of years on the life. I wouldn't be very happy about someone saying about that about my mum at the time. But there were ways in which you could have protected those people without locking the whole of the economy down and making cities ghost towns and continuing to pay people to sit at home and work from home. And of course, we are paying the price of that now. And you see that still with employers almost fighting with their employees to come back into the office. It's a nonsensical discussion.
The young people who are out of work, most of those will have gone through that period of all of a sudden school stopped. If you hadn't got access to a computer at home, or you were fighting with your siblings to get on it, or your mum or dad or whoever, you were just suddenly plunged into isolation and then expected to carry on. And, in the same way as we've never really collectively never recognised that we are still paying the price for the 2008 financial crash. And apart from, those of us who were so anti-Brexit in the first place, we've never as a country recognised the total damage of Brexit financially, particularly. And I think the COVID thing, you're absolutely right. Yes, if you'd put proper safety measures in place in care homes and hospitals and those sort of situations, but allowed children to go to school and actually not have that, as Jim calls it, the hokey cokey of, let's lock down. There was one week where the schools opened for a week and then they closed again the following week. And then you had that nonsense of eat out to help out. Oh yeah, let's help out and spread the disease. What a great idea, Rishi Sunak. And we're still paying the price of it. So, the lessons we need to learn from that is actually the good things about how local charities, local councils and local people stepped up. But all that community spirit has long disappeared and is now covered by union flags and hatred. And you sort of think, actually, that's the journey we need to look at. How did we go from there to here?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that happened which were strange during the pandemic, not least you could go for a pint if you had a Scotch egg. But if you didn't have a Scotch egg, you couldn't have a pint. I mean, it was.
It's
when you
ridiculous.
look back, you think, you couldn't make it up, could you?
No.
That was actually a rule. You could go to the pub so long as you had something to eat. But fucking absolutely unbelievable that
Yeah.
we're all sort of sat there like nodding dogs, and remember that famous phrase that Johnson used when he was finally deposed as Prime Minister, when the herd moves. Bloody hell, there were an awful lot of sheep in this country during COVID.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I think when people criticise politicians, they do need to have a little look at themselves, because the number of people who were almost celebrating lockdowns when they were announced, because, oh, great, we're going to get furlough. I mean, again, no real mention of the fact that that furlough scheme that was introduced and some of the other financial support mechanisms that were put in place, well over the top. It's why the country is in debt, by the way.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the financial crash or Brexit. The reason we're in so much debt is because of the amount of money that Sunak threw at the pandemic. People were on 80% of their wages at one point for sitting at home doing fuck all. So you've saved on your mortgage because mortgage companies were told, give people an opportunity to not pay the mortgage, a mortgage holiday, I think it was called. You're not going into work, so you got no expense in terms of travel, petrol, lunches. Okay, you may say there's a little bit of additional cost because you sat at home, but if you remember, the most glorious summer that we'd ever had, that particular summer, so it wasn't costing you any more in heating. It cost me a lot more in vodka and gin, I have to say, at the time. But honestly, the economic decisions that were made, I think more emphasis should have been placed on that than simply, did we lock down sooner enough? But as you've both said, 200 million quid for a report that I bet you it's in somebody's bin or on somebody's shelf gathering dust within the next 3 months, and it'll all be very quickly forgotten. It's a shame. But if anything, you would hope that it is a report that people can pull out if rumours persist that Boris Johnson might be the knight in shining armour to save the Conservative Party anytime soon. Anyway, let's move on to a subject where, to be fair to him, Boris Johnson did do a reasonably good job, and that's Ukraine, because we've had word this week that there is a new peace plan, a 28-point peace plan that has been presented by the United States, written by Russia, from what I can tell. Ukraine and the Europeans reacted very robustly against this plan, and it seems that Marco Rubio is currently talking to European leaders. Indeed, Keir Starmer is due to have a conversation with President Donald Trump today, and we may see something different emerge. But do we feel as though we're any closer to getting a peace deal in Ukraine? Jim?
It's difficult to see it, because if this 28 points was approved by Russia, and if there's these negotiations going on now and they're considerably modified, which they should be, of course, because it's the 28 points really involve a territorial loss, not just what's been conquered already by Russia, but some additional land in the Donbass area, banning them from joining the EU or NATO, halving their army. But if that's modified, then they go back to Putin and he rejects it, then we're back to square one. It seems to me that we're back in the situation at the moment where Trump is sort of berating Zelensky again, calling him ungrateful for everything that America's done. And but the crucial thing is, what degree of security are we prepared to give Ukraine? I don't think. Well, we'll see what happens about EU membership and NATO membership. But the bottom line is, if the war stops, what is the guarantee that it won't start up again? And you would want that to be provided by the United States explicitly. But I just, interested what you guys think about if Trump, goes off in a huff and says, you're ungrateful and you're on your own, keep on fighting if that's what you want to do. Can NATO, can the rest of, can the European powers and Canada in particular step up and give the sort of guarantees to Ukraine without perhaps much support from the United States? And and it goes back to what you were saying in the earlier discussion about our willingness to spend money on defense. Is that a possible way out? If Trump is so in hock for whatever reason to the Russians, can the Europeans and Canada provide Ukraine with the guarantees that the Russians will have to respect? And would the Russians sort of accept that? I'm pessimistic at the moment.
I think that there's a number of things to unpick there, Jim. Firstly, Donald Trump has been damaged by the Epstein episode, the 4 elections that took place in November. His standing within the Republican Party has diminished in the last few weeks. And so those people, the majority of whom, to be fair to them in the Republican Party, who do think Ukraine should be supported, because let's remember when Biden was president, it was all party support that he had. Some voices like the lunatic who's just said she's not going to stand again for a seat were arguing against supporting Ukraine, but the majority of Americans supported Ukraine. But I do think that equally America has a point. Why should we be the people who continue to prop up the United Nations? Why hasn't Europe over the last decade or so started to increase its spending on defence? Because we're the ones that are saying it's our borders that are going to be under threat from Russia. And if we were a little more aggressive, not just in terms of our rhetoric, but in terms of our ability to support in a defence way, weapons way, then perhaps Putin would have been a bit more frit than he has been, because we're dealing here, Joe, with a Russian nation that economically is on its knees. Yeah, we talk about our economic challenges, and yet Putin is still robust enough, bullish enough to come forward with this plan, which would satisfy nobody other than Putin.
Yeah, but he hasn't got any opposition. He's got no opposition in the media, so he can do what he likes. And he's proved over the last 2 decades that what he has got in the bucket load is patience and time. And we Europe should have moved in much more quickly in 2014 when the Russians took over Crimea. We let it pass, and he sat back and thought, oh well, they're obviously not going to do anything, they don't care. I think I think the point that you make, Frank, is fair enough. And I think, although I wouldn't have necessarily done it in the way Donald Trump did, yes, NATO and Europe have been, oh no, it's fine, we can just carry on and America will bail us out. But we've got that message. Every single country in Europe has increased defence spending. There has been a real sort of coming together, and that's where I think Keir Starmer has been absolutely brilliant. You've got very sensible Mark Rutte, now NATO Secretary General, and despite the political differences, you've got Giorgia Meloni of Italy, you've got Macron, who's got his own troubles at home, and you've got Europe and, as you say, Canada, and interestingly Japan, coming together. But what we need to be able to do, and I think there are 2 problems here. One is for Ukraine to become a member of NATO, which Russia probably won't allow. But I read this morning that we are going to allow Russia to come back into the G8, which seems a little bit peculiar. The thing that I think is really worrying, and if I was living in Poland, I'd be extremely worried, is that if there is a new deal and there is some sort of ceasefire, there would then have to be elections in Ukraine within 100 days. And I think, there is a sense that actually Zelensky's been in power. Obviously, you can't have elections in the middle of the war. And therein lies the problem, that if Russia then manipulate the elections and trade on the scandal, the corruption scandal that has enveloped Ukraine and not Zelensky, but it doesn't help him. And of course, that was why they weren't allowed to join NATO in the first place, and why there's been a hesitancy about them joining the EU. So there's all of those things that, down the line, there may be a ceasefire, but there might not be Zelensky, there might be a Putin puppet. And I wouldn't trust Putin to not go marching into Poland or Lithuania, within weeks or years, because he doesn't have to do it right now. And if that doesn't, make Europe sit up and think we need to, I mean, nobody wants to spend money on defence because you can't see it. It's like house insurance. But we need to, because I think we are almost already at war, certainly in cyberspace, and certainly with what's happening in the oceans and seas with, cables and things like that. I think we're in a very, very dangerous place. And, if you go back to that ghastly meeting in the Oval Office in February, when poor old Zelensky was absolutely humiliated by Trump and Vance and the press pack there. And Trump said to him, what are you trying to do? Start World War III? Well, I think we're probably closer to World War III than we've ever been. But it is going to be a battle for Europe to come together against Russia, who I think is going to become more and more aggressive.
Well, you're right, Joe. We are at war. If you look at the attacks that are the cyber attacks that are taking place, there were 2 Russian submarines, I think, that were moved away from British waters this week by the Navy. They're obviously agitating. Now, when we think of wars, of course, we do think about what we've seen in Ukraine, what we've seen in Gaza, with these bombs being dropped on. But of course, it's sophisticated now, isn't it? You have, as you say, these cyber attacks. Jaguar Land Rover suffered one, which we suspect, I think it was the Russians that were ultimately suspected. It may have been China, I can't remember which now. But that's the way in which wars are going to be waged, not necessarily tanks on the ground. And it is a worry. I just, again, come back to the point that we've made repeatedly in this podcast. People have not been prepared to spend money on defence, and so politicians do what their people want because they are seeking re-election, and nobody is being prepared to have the honest conversation of saying we are under threat now, and we are unfortunately going to have to give up the peace dividend, which we benefited from for a number of decades, and we're going to have to tighten our belts, increase taxes, whatever that might be. As I say, Rachel Reeves had that opportunity to do that, I think, 12 months ago here. I think Germany have done that in terms of increasing their defence spending. Not quite sure where France are as far as spend in comparison to their GDP is. But yeah, it's going to have to happen, because I can't see whoever comes after Trump necessarily doing anything massively different. Okay, they're not going to be as nuts as Trump acts, but the American people are fed up with foreign wars and fed up with propping up NATO. So Europe is going to have to increase its spending, whether we like it or not, or face the consequences, Jim.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. If you had a Democratic president, would that automatically mean huge support for Ukraine? I think the Democrats may be, because Trump always accuses the Democrats of making wars and leaving the Republicans to make peace. It doesn't bear looking at very much in relation to Iraq and things like that. But, I think the Democrats would not immediately start committing the United States all over the world as in the past. Just one final comment, because I must go in a moment. The Russian attempt to manipulate the elections in Moldova weren't successful, Joe. But I do agree with you that Zelensky is weakened by these corruption allegations. Enemies of Ukraine point to that. And I think it is a time of domestic weakness for them, but the Russian, the Moldovan people saw through the Russian attempts at manipulation.
And to end on the note of Ukraine joining the European Union and NATO, I think there's more chance of Jeremy Corbyn and your party winning the next election, Jim, to be honest. And what's happened to Sultana? She joined the Greens yet? I'm looking at our producer, Francesca. She's not looking now. Don't think she has, but it's not.
No, but
far.
the interesting thing on the far left is that Polanski has actually grabbed the sort of the radical left agenda, and whether you agree with him or not, he's moving forward on it and giving a clear thing. Whereas your party is sort of virtually imploding. They're due to have their conference in Liverpool in a few days' time, I believe.
Yeah, I might go to that. Could be interesting. I doubt if I get in. Anyway. We will report back on that next week, perhaps. Let's see what happens at your party. But what we will know by next Monday, of course, is the final decisions of the Chancellor and whether or not she has managed to pull, I guess, several rabbits out of the hat to make it a budget that gets the government back on track. Thanks for joining us today. It's been great to be back in the company of Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. Thanks to Francesca King, our producer today. We'll see you all next week. Have a great 7 days, everyone.